A new wave is sweeping across the Europe in the wake of Ukraine war. This wave is the rise of conservative parties and the right-wing leaders. From Hungary's Viktor Orban to Slovakia's Robert Fico, these leaders are reshaping the continent's politics and triggering unease within the NATO bloc. But what makes this new breed of the right-wing politicians different? Well, they are pragmatists who prioritize the populist interest over the ideological warfare. They are not afraid to challenge the established order, particularly when it comes to the policies on Ukraine and immigration. This trend is particularly strong in Eastern Europe, and now Austria appears to be next in line. Despite the hardline effort to prevent the conservative parties from gaining the ground, Austria seems poised for a significant political shift, potentially ushering in a new government that could take harder stance on both Ukraine support and the immigration policies. Austria viewers is probably going to see its first ever anti-Ukraine and anti-Islamist government very soon. And honestly, the EU and NATO can't do anything about it now. As per the local reports, Herbert Kickl is now the front runner to lead Austria after 3 month long uncertainty of coalition talks. After months of unsuccessful coalition attempt, the president Van der Bellen has agreed to meet the FPO leader. What's interesting here is the shifting stance of the People's Party. Their previous resistance to the working with the Kickl's FPO seems to be softening. As noted by the president himself, we quote, voices within the People's Party that ruled out the cooperation with the FPO under Herbert Kickl is now quieter. The background here is also crucial. Since September's elections, where the FPO secured a significant 29.2% of the vote, traditional parties, Nehammer's OVP, the Social Democrats, and the Liberal Neos, tried to form a viable government without the FPO. However, all of these attempts have failed. These unsuccessful attempts have now effectively forced a reconsideration of including the far-right FPO in the government. In the midst of this, Austria's Chancellor Karl Nehammer has declared that he will step down within the next few days following the second failure in negotiations to create a new government. A day after the Liberal Neos party abruptly withdrew from the coalition talk, Nehammer's announcement followed the continuation of coalition talk between the Social Democrats and the People's Party. Nehammer will now continue to serve as the Chancellor until the new interim government is formed, which he has promised to do within the next week, according to the Austrian president. But the doors are now wide open for Herbert Kickl. Herbert Kickl's Freedom Party emerged Austria's leading political force in 2024 elections, securing a 29.2% of the vote. The FPO was the single largest party as per the vote share. However, the traditional parties denied forming any coalition with them due to the ideological differences. Herbert Kickl's stance on the Ukraine war has been notably different from the mainstream European leaders. He has advocated for Russia in the Ukraine war, questioning Austria's support for EU sanctions against Russia and arguing that such measures can harm Austrian interests more than they help Ukraine. Even on the immigration, particularly regarding the Islamic immigration, Kickl has maintained a hardline position, even claiming that these extremists are flooding Europe with crime. His party has pushed for stricter border control and a more restrictive immigration policies, drawing condemnation from the EU. These positions have drawn both strong support and criticism. The supporters view his approach as protecting the Austrian interest and sovereignty, while the critics argue that his policies can isolate Austria from the European allies and can harm international relationships too. But despite all, Herbert is now emerging victorious. With his arrival, one thing is sure shot. NATO is now going to see intense trouble from Austria amid the war. Anyway, the rise of conservative leaders across Europe is creating significant challenges for both the EU and Ukraine's war efforts. From Slovakia's Fico to Austria's potential Kickl leadership, A new wave of conservative politicians is reshaping the continental politics, largely fueled by the growing public fatigue over the prolonged war. These leaders have successfully tapped into the war weariness, with citizens increasingly questioning the economic cost of supporting Ukraine. They prioritize the national interest over broader EU objectives, challenging the military aid commitment and the Brussels' immigration policies. This trend is particularly strong in Eastern Europe, where the conservative parties are gaining ground by promising to protect their national sovereignty and traditional values. Their growing influence has now impacted EU's unity, with several countries reducing their support for Ukraine and pushing back the shenanigans of NATO.